Hello! The competition is continuing on towards crowning the best book of fiction in translation because the International Booker Prize has just announced their shortlist, and these are the 6 novels. And there are some surprises here. We need to talk about this. But before I get into talking about the shortlist as a whole, I know some readers only start following book prizes once the shortlist has been announced. So I'm going to go through each of these books individually, give brief descriptions of them and any thoughts or feelings I have about any of these titles, because I've read 3 out of these 6 books so far. I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of them and discussing them with all of you, as well as some other books from the long list that I haven't been able to get to yet. But the winner is going to be announced on May 23rd. So if you want to join in following the prize, please let me know in the comments below if you will be reading all of these books or if only some of them appeal to you, or if you've been following the prize already. Please let me know about that. I want to hear all of your thoughts about the shortlist and what long-listed books you feel should have been shortlisted. First up, we have Boulder by Eva Baltasar, translated by Julia Sanches. Quite a short novel, but incredibly powerful, about a young woman who is very independent. She lives and works on a ship. She's happy with her rootless existence until she meets and forms a very strong connection with another woman. They decide to settle down with each other, and eventually she agrees to have a child with her. So it's about this tension between maintaining this completely autonomous existence and forming a family unit where other people are dependent on you and you have these obligations. And I've had so many interesting conversations with other readers since reading this book, and we've been discussing it because I think it raises so many questions about the meaning and motivations in our life, and what obligation do we have to other people that we fall in love with. Is it better to sort of subsume your own desires and motivations and your own nature in order to maintain these very strong intimate connections, or are you able to do both? I think this story approaches this in such an interesting way, and how it plays out is so fascinating and yeah, provokes so much great discussion. The Gospel According to the New World by Maryse Conde, translated by Richard Philcox. This story is about a modern-day Messiah, or is he a Messiah, who is born in the Caribbean, and the events of his life roughly parallel the major events of the New Testament. So we follow his journeys, his misadventures, his affairs with a number of different women, and his connection with a number of different kinds of people from different religions, and the challenges he finds in trying to bring this message of peace to the modern world. And it's really impressive that Maryse Conde is in her late 80s. She has lost her vision, so she actually wrote this entire novel in her head, and Richard Philcox, who is also her husband, transcribed it and then translated it into English. Now, I have to say, I had some issues with this novel in that I wasn't really entirely sure of what the point of it was as I was reading along, and even when I got to the end, I thought there were some interesting elements of it, and characters and possibilities and ways of playing out some of the ideas that she introduces, but so much of it feels like it's really sticking to the events of the New Testament and just changing them to fit in with the modern world, but not in a way which says anything necessarily about our contemporary life. So I wasn't really sure what she was trying to do with that, but it was interesting. Since I finished reading this book, they've published on the Booker Prize website interviews with all of the authors and translators, and so I went to the interview with Maryse Conde, and it's really interesting. So she says, in terms of her inspiration for this book, that she says, "My mother was a devoted believer and my father a confessed atheist and an ardent critic of my mother's religious beliefs. I wanted to translate this dichotomy in my novel into humor and irony." So yeah, that is really interesting to hear. And I did feel how this novel was playing out this tension between belief and non-belief, but I ultimately felt like this novel could have done so much more to explore that. Standing Heavy by GauZ, translated by Frank Wynne, another quite short novel, which is following the lives of 3 different black men from the Ivory Coast in different decades who all find work as security guards in Paris. So in part, this book is satirical, and it's looking at colonial legacies and capitalist consumption. Time Shelter by Georgi Gospodinov, translated by Angela Rodel. In this novel, the narrator meets a very mysterious figure named Gospodin, who creates this clinic for patients that are suffering the effects of dementia. So he creates these different periods of time in different decades on different floors of the clinic, and the patients find comfort in spending time in these environments from the past. But eventually the public starts enjoying plunging into the past like this in a completely three-dimensional way, and eventually different countries in Europe want to revert back to different decades from the past and hold referendums to turn back the clocks. And in the midst of this larger political story, we get small details about the narrator's life and what it was like growing up under a communist system, and what that says about these countries' desires to go back in time, and how that comments on our modern politics. And I found it so compelling how this novel explores these ideas to do with memory and history and nostalgia, and the comfort we find in nostalgia, but also the dangers of it when we completely lose ourselves to it, both in our personal lives and in our larger public and political lives. I wish it had given me a bit more about the life of the narrator in this story, but overall, a very powerful book that is very relevant as well. Whale by Cheon Myeong-Kwan, translated by Chi Yun Kim. This story begins being about a mysterious young brickmaker who has an imposing physicality and isn't able to speak. But then it becomes a multi-generational family saga, a satire, a dark fairy tale, and a series of body anecdotes. Now, it's fascinating, the history of this book. It was first written and published way back in 2004, and it's become a big bestseller and like a classic in South Korean literature, but it was only just translated recently. And it's interesting reading the interview with the author, who said that he wrote it so long ago, and it's kind of fascinating that recently there was a film called The Whale that was also about someone with a very physically imposing presence. And I've heard so many competing opinions about this novel. I am so interested to read it for myself. And finally, there is Stillborn by Guadalupe Nettel, translated by Rosalind Harvey. This story is about 2 young women who decide fairly early on that they never want to have children, but as time goes on and some events happen, they find themselves involved involved in motherhood in ways that they didn't expect. Now, I am so excited to read this book, especially after reading Boulder by Eva Baltasar, which looks at similar subjects, but I think they take a very different point of view and have a different way of handling this subject matter. I predicted that both of these books would be on the shortlist, and I'm glad that they both are, because I have been really wanting to read this. I've heard so many great things about it, and I think it's so wonderful when literature starts to have this conversation with itself in ways that, you know, the authors never could have anticipated, but we as readers come to it at a period of time when they happen to overlap. And I'm sure the judges felt that this novel has such a different point of view and take on the same subject matter than Boulder does. Now, overall, it is quite an interesting shortlist. In some ways, I'm really happy to see an even gender split on here, because on the long list, it was more male-dominated, so that's sort of nice to see. And it's also nice to see a really good spread across the worlds from different countries and different literatures, since also the long list was European heavy, but really these titles come from so many different places around the world. And I am extremely happy to see Boulder on this list, as well as Stillborn and Standing Heavy, because I've been really wanting to read those titles. I am also glad to see Time Shelter on here, even though there were some elements of the book that didn't entirely work for me. I felt like on the whole, it is so fascinating, and really, really recommend reading it. Now, I do have to say, where is The Birthday Party? I really wish The Birthday Party had been on this shortlist, because this is my favorite book from the long list that I've read so far. I was just ecstatic of falling into this very, very tense story, and then the larger meaning of the book has continued to creep up on me as I've thought about it in the weeks since reading it. It is such an accomplished novel, so fascinating. But of course, the point and the fun of book prizes is that it encourages us to discuss all of these titles that the judges have marked out as being really exceptional, and comparing them and to think about them much more in depth than we would if we were just reading them on our own, and hopefully find some new favorites. And these two in particular are some of the best books that I've read in a long time, and I don't think I would have got around to reading them if it wasn't for this prize. So I'm hoping we can have lots more conversations leading up to the winner being announced on May 23rd. So like I said, let me know in the comments below which of these books you're interested in reading, or that you've been meaning to get to, or if you have been reading all of the long list, let me know what you think of the shortlist. Let's discuss it in the comments below. I want to hear all of your thoughts, and I'm looking forward to reading more, and I hope you find some new favorite books following this prize as well. So thank you for watching. I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.